and Debbie, who's obviously the co-host, are able to join, they will. And obviously we'll be delighted when Lola arrives, but I think we'll just get started with the programme. So we're delighted to have our first speaker, Dame Sarah Thornton, does not need any introduction, but is the UK Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much to BASNET and the Human Trafficking Foundation for arranging another conference. I think we're exactly a year on from last July when you jointly hosted a conference, which really provided us with a very important forum and just prompted the sector, I think, to think very seriously about issues of equality, diversity and inclusion. So thank you once again for arranging this, really, really important. But of course, there's been a lot of work in the meantime. People have been working very hard on the action plan that we're going to be discussing today. BASNET, again, taking the lead. Great to see that, great leadership from Debbie in this, but also working with other organisations, brought a committee together, consulted with lots of people, and we've got the action plan today, which I'm sure Debbie will talk us through in a few minutes. So really pleased to see that it wasn't just a one-off, and I think we were very keen that it wouldn't be a one-off, that actually this is an ongoing commitment, and it's a commitment that's got momentum. And certainly from my perspective as Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, and also the perspective of all my colleagues who work with me, this is something where we really do want to play our part and to make sure that it's not just words, but actually it's followed up by actions. I was thinking as I was preparing for today, why is this important? And last year, I can remember talking about the fact we were right at the beginning of lockdown issues with difficulties about getting the right sort of support to survivors. And one of the issues that was raised by several community groups was that the tokens that were given for survivors to buy food were only usable at kind of like mainstream supermarkets, and people who wanted to maybe go to more local grocers that sold the sort of ethnic food that they were used to eating just weren't able to. And I thought at the time that that was a really good example about a lack of inclusion, and just not thinking that actually what works for a lot of people doesn't work for everybody. I'm thinking about another example of that this year. Some of you on the call might have joined a really good event, which was run by the Rights Lab at Nottingham and Survivor Alliance. They've been doing some research on mental health recovery for survivors. It's called Moments. And it was a really good piece of work, not least because they had a survivor research advisory board working alongside the academics, which was a really, really good initiative, I think. And as we thought about what it means in terms of mental health recovery, and we talked about feelings-based recovery, we talked about socio-cultural community-based recovery, we talked about emotional and therapeutic support. That whole issue of culturally appropriate mental health support was something that was coming up time and time again. And I'm going to read the quotation from the report, which I just think sums it up how important this is for people, particularly for survivors, for their recovery. I think the fact that the help is not available as such, because obviously you can go through the NHS, but the massive waiting list is very off-putting. That's one. Secondly, culturally, you don't want people making fun of you, so you tend to bottle things up. And also because obviously as a Black woman, a lot of us are brought up to suck it up, to move on. It happened, get over it, that kind of mentality. So it's hard to overcome that kind of mentality, because if you do break down, you're seen as a weak person. And I don't mind being seen as weak anymore, but a lot of people still do. And I think from the voice of a survivor, just explaining how that understanding those cultural issues is so key for effective support. And so we'll go through the plan later on. As you see, it's very comprehensive. It's got 9 sections, and there are kind of 3 areas I was going to pull out where there is a real link to the sorts of things I have set out in my strategic plan. The first is the importance of evidence and data. And one of the things that the plan draws attention to is the fact that for the NRM statistics, we still don't have the ethnic breakdown. And we have raised that formally and informally with the Home Office over a long time. But that is absolutely essential. I was looking at the figures for the last financial year, 45% of referrals for children. A lot of those will be UK children, and I suspect an awful lot for Black and minority backgrounds. But we don't have that data, and I think that's a really important thing, and we should all be pushing for that. The second thing that's really good to see in the plan is that focus on research, focus on the inclusion of survivors' voices in research. And it's really good to see that BASNET is beginning to develop a relationship with the Modern Slavery Policy and Evidence Centre. I think Alex Balch is speaking later. That is really important to see. And also to see survivor inclusion, not just as something that's tacked on at the end, but that actually, even as we're thinking about where is the research, that survivor voice is throughout the whole process, contributing and giving that really important experience of lived experience. And lastly, it links to my kind of point about the moments research. It struck me as I looked through the plan, time and time again, the importance of cultural intelligence and awareness was referenced. And we just went through and picked them out of the plan. It's important for NRM decision makers. It's important when police officers are dealing with potential victims and when they're dealing with investigations. It's important for anti-trafficking professionals supporting potential victims and survivors. It's important for local authority housing staff and decision makers who are looking at housing and accommodation, care and support for victims and survivors. It's important for the legal profession, including judges, but all through the legal profession, lawyers in the courts, the appeals, cultural intelligence and awareness are really important. It's important for health professionals when they are presented with potential victims of modern slavery. And of course, it's important for the wider sector, charities, advocacy groups and partnerships who are providing victim and survivor-centred care. So there is a lot in the plan, but those are the three things that I really would like us to focus on. Well done for getting us this far. Well done that it wasn't just a one-off last summer. And actually, there's been great work, and look forward to working with all of you to take it forward. Thanks. I'll hand back to you now, Tamara.
Great, thank you so much. That's really, really helpful, and I really appreciate you pulling out some of those key points that I think seem so obvious, and it's something I think we all want to do, but it's about everyone playing a role in sort of achieving that. I believe Baroness Lola maybe have managed to get it on. I know
yes.
Ruka is down here. Great. So I'm going to just hand over to and very quickly introduce Baroness. So Baroness Young was appointed to the House of Lords in 2004. Since 2009, she's been involved in strengthening legislation, working with government, researchers, NGOs, and business.
Actually, Tamara, don't worry about it.
Okay. Basically, Baroness Young is an amazing person. We're really pleased to chair. And over to you.
Thank you. And everybody, I'm so sorry. Technological issues just didn't go my way today. So many apologies for that. So I guess I'm just trying to just quickly get back on track here. I guess, so we've heard from Sarah Thornton, which is great. And I just caught the tail end of her remarks and totally agree with her about how good it is to be following up on last year's event. And I think now we're going to hand over to Debbie, who's similarly experienced really great difficulties in getting through to this meeting. So apologies once more for any tardiness. And Debbie, are you ready to go?
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm so sorry, everybody, for the technological problems we had. So I'm not going to face another technological problem in relation to sharing my screen. Just give me a minute. Let me see if I can do that successfully. Right? Can you see that? I think that's right. Right, that's good. Thank you, everyone. So, well, firstly, I want to say thank you to everybody who's been a part of this journey with us at BASNET. It wasn't very easy because we had obviously resource challenges as a very small, very new network. but we were able to make some progress. And I'm really very pleased and very proud that we were able to finally, produce this action plan. And of course, we're launching it today. So I want to just say a few things in relation to the action plan and the journey so far, and of course, the way forward. So we actually were able to get some funding from Esme Fairbairn Foundation in November 2019, just right before the lockdown, to establish BASNET. And so we weren't even able to do much before the lockdown. We were only able to have our inaugural meeting before the lockdown. But BASNET has been, working in relation to encouraging and amplifying the voices of marginalized communities in anti-slavery. Our main aim, when we set up BASNET, we were not talking about an action plan on racial equality. We wanted to strengthen the voices of marginalized communities in the UK in relation to their involvement in the anti-trafficking and anti-slavery space. That was what we wanted to do. But we've moved on now, and as we are now, we have our full members. We have about 20 organizations who are members, full members, i.e. community and grassroots charities. And of course, associate members who are, practitioners, academics, and so on and so forth. We're working in 4 areas now. Research, we have a research panel, which is coordinated by Dr. Liz Such. Dr. Liz is also a member of our EDI working group. And of course, we have our survivors panel, which is a panel of the young people that we've supported over the years. So we've done our panel is that we have young people who have been long-term service users of Africa, not just recent service users. So in terms of the action plan, if you were here last year at the conference we did last year, you will understand the raison d'etre for the conference last year. It was all because of George Floyd, and the terrible thing that happened in America in June last year or in May last year. We issued a statement in June. We had the conference in July, and between July and now, we've done a lot of work to get us to the stage where we are at today. And there's a bigger rationale, I would say, for having this EDI action plan. And it's important to note, just this week in our charity sector, 2 charities, I'm not going to mention names, of 2 charities are being pilloried because of racism. Their approaches towards racism in their organization. So there's a wind of change blowing through our sector, the charity sector. And that wind of change is coming here in our anti-trafficking and anti-slavery sector. It will get to us if we don't do something about it. So I guess this is the right time. And it's important to consider the impact of racial injustices, discrimination, racial inequality in the lives of the people that we claim to be working for. There's the only one reason why every single charity in the anti-trafficking sector is here is because of survivors of trafficking. So it is also important to consider the role of racial injustices and inequality in fueling different forms of human trafficking and modern slavery. So, for example, if we look at issues like county lines trafficking, there's a huge range of issues involved in that. We're also currently conducting a survey. It's still live, that survey, and I can share some of the results of that survey with you, which is on our website at bmeantislavery.org. So essentially, we're trying to gauge some understanding of what's happening in this sector in relation to people's experiences of racism and discrimination. So far, we had 11 responses, and almost 64% said they've actually experienced incidences of racism, or they've seen service users experience racism in our sector. 64%, and of course. The good news is some organizations are already beginning to act to deal with this problem. I can't really say that because this is covering it, but I think that's 74% or 75% in the sector saying that actually their organization is beginning to do something about it by putting in place an action plan. And we talked about the impact that the Black Lives Matter global campaign has had on different organizations in the sector. And I'm just going to pick one of the responses we had, where somebody said it's had a significant impact that they had a whistleblowing in their charity and that people were found to be racist. So they're not trying to deal with that issue. So essentially, I think we're on the right track in relation to how we're trying to address this issue. So I want to spend about the next 10 minutes to talk about the work we did itself. So the action plan itself is set under 9 different thematic areas. And we chose those 9 thematic areas because we felt these were the core issues in relation to survivors and communities. And of course, people who are working in this sector. And we looked at different issues, in relation to the priority. We wanted to actually highlight the overarching aim that we are seeking to achieve for a specific theme. We identified a number of issues, problems, challenges going on within that thematic areas. We came up with some recommendations. We also tried to identify, and this was the hardest part of drawing up this action plan, who will be responsible for actually addressing this issue. And at this point, I really want to say a big thank you to the commissioner and her staff members, and Catherine and April. Without Catherine and April, it would have been very, very difficult for us to actually undertake this part of the work, because they really helped us to identify who in the sector is responsible for what. And we're not just do that, but they were also able to help us to link up with those different agencies. So we're able to make very good progress because of that input from the commissioner's office. So thank you very much for that. We were also able to identify indicators of progress and also some measurable outcomes. And
also, before you go, Miriam goes, I'm going to show.
Sorry, is there somebody saying something to me, or I'm imagining it? So I think somebody said something just now. So let me just go through a summary of the action plan, the thematic areas. So for example, I'm not going to go through all of them. Let me just identify 1 or 2 of them. The modern slavery, human trafficking policy and data was a key issue for us, because this was just about government policy on immigration and of course on modern slavery. We identified 15 issues with a number of recommendations there. In relation to the provision of services for survivors, we identified 8 issues. There were many other issues, so we decided to discard them because it would have been very difficult to track progress. In relation to working communities and engagement, identified 6 issues, and so on and so forth. And this is the approach that we took: measurable outcomes. We wanted measurable outcomes. We wanted to have issues that we could actually track over the next, few months or 1 year. So measurable, that the recommendations and indicators of progress were developed regularly, evaluated regularly by those identified as responsible, that is achievable. So we haven't written the Holy Bible, or should I say we haven't rewritten the Holy Bible. We also haven't produced an encyclopedia. We wanted something very, I guess adopting it would be because you have an open mind in relation to this issue. We believe every agency responsible should be able to deliver if they have the political will to do so. So I guess the core issue there is in relation to having the political will to do so. And every single recommendation and the indicator of progress is actually doable. And so all of this is time bound. So we've identified realistic timeframes for achieving this: short term, medium term, and long term. We also imbibed a consultative approach. We met with a number of government agencies, a number of charities. They really questioned us. Why are you doing this? What are you seeking to achieve? What do you want to achieve at the end of it? And so on and so forth. And of course, some of the outcomes from all this work is not just in relation to writing the action plan itself, but it's also in terms of follow-up work. But apart from that, there were some issues that came up. For example, it was gratifying to hear people admit that yes, there are gaps in terms of how we address this issue. And I guess that certain sense of humility is good, because it shows that there will be attempts to rectify that. We also found that some organizations were already doing some work anyway. And where work wasn't already happening, people were very, very ready to start work. I mean, like MSPEC is wonderful, because MSPEC told us right there and then that we're going to do this. And we thought that was a very positive. There was also an openness in relation to collaboration. And of course, we were very pleased to have different agencies endorse the document itself. So this part of the presentation, I don't want to spend a long time to go through every single issue here. I'm going to identify about 2 or 3 different issues in relation to what we covered in the action plan under different themes. So under the first theme on modern slavery policy and data, of concern, of course, to us at Africa and BASNET was the overrepresentation of Black children with learning disabilities in county lines trafficking. And the reason that was of concern was simply because there didn't seem to be any overall government policy to address it. So there are things happening. We acknowledge that there are things happening, but there's nothing concrete. There's no strategic national approach to addressing county lines trafficking. But not only that, it doesn't actually seem to be seen, at least it doesn't appear to be seen as a modern slavery issue. So it's just county lines and it's being done on the side, but it's not part of the government's strategy on modern slavery. That was very clear to us. So we felt that definitely this has to be the case, that a national action plan to tackle county lines trafficking must be developed within the next 1 year, so that we can actually begin to track progress. The other issue that is of concern to us in relation to research, mainly in relation to the involvement of affected communities and the people affected themselves, i.e. the victims and the survivors in terms of research. They're not involved in most cases. They're not informed. They're not able to inform research, and they're not involved in research. And so a key action point there was for the MSPEC. And I think Alex, is going to talk about what they're doing so far at MSPEC. A key issue there is in relation to MSPEC developing an action plan, again, in relation to addressing this issue or these gaps. We know that Estia did some wonderful work in relation to identifying how the police are failing many victims of trafficking. Of course, we know that very recently, it was after we published this action plan, that the chief constable actually wrote to all the different constabularies in relation to taking action to address all these gaps. So we're beginning to see some progress being made in relation to some of the issues that we raised. Another issue I want to highlight really is in terms of survivors. The issue around survivors having difficulties in accessing housing. This is an issue that is personal, because in Africa, we've worked with hundreds of survivors of trafficking. I mean, over the past 15 years, hundreds of young people, and in most cases, almost every single young person, once they get their leave, whatever the leave is, once they get their leave to remain, the next difficulty they face is access to safe, habitable, and appropriate local authority housing. It comes up time and time again. And sometimes young people will call from a housing office in tears because they've been abused by a local authority official. So we have issues with local authority housing and modern slavery victims. So we were very pleased that the Homelessness Code of Guidance, the section of modern slavery, was actually reviewed. And we feel that that is actually a positive way forward. And in actual fact, not only that, we also actually had a service user at Africa who could testify to that without even knowing the basis of it. She just testified that actually I went there and this is what they told me, that we have to look after you now because you're a victim of trafficking. So, we're beginning to see some changes here and there in our sector. And I feel that it's important that we can actually broaden that out.
Sorry to interrupt you, Debbie. Just to let you know, you've got 3 more minutes.
Yes. So, okay. So very quickly then, I just want to highlight how we feel that the action plan is going to affect the status quo, how we do things now and what's likely to change. I'll pick 1 or 2 out of this. We feel that it will generate ongoing conversations around race, equality, diversity, and inclusion in our sector. It is important, definitely, that we continue to have that conversation in relation to what's happening. So the next stage for us really is to start to, continue to have those conversations, like I said, but also continue to start to track progress. So all these different, recommendations, we want to start to track progress to see how well different parts of the sector are doing. Just to round up, I want to say something in relation to all of this. For changes to happen in our sector, it's important to understand the type of anti-trafficking leaders we will have to make this happen. Deliberate activists, they acknowledge that racism is a problem. There's a personal commitment to change. They will put the resources in place to make this happen. And they're prepared to go the whole length to make this happen. Those are the sort of people we need to make these changes happen in our sector in relation to tackling racism and discrimination. So I guess that's the end of the presentation, but I just want to ask, if you're not a member of BASNET already, you can be a member, either a full member or an associate member. And that is the website address if you wish to please go on it and find out more about BASNET. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie, and apologies if I cut you off there because you made up a lot of time given the delayed start. So thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. Will the slides be available to delegates afterwards, or is it essentially the report?
Well, we can send out the slides, but we will encourage people to actually read the action plan itself because it's more comprehensive. But we can send out the slides.
Yeah, no, but that excellent presentation and really does lay out the landscape for people. So thank you very much indeed for that. I'm going to move on now to receive a statement from BASNET EDI working group, 2 members of that, Elizabeth Such, who's at the University of Sheffield, and Nina Samota, whom I know well and work with in other contexts, who's from St Mary's University. And I look forward to hearing what they say. I'm going to say to you, as I was instructed, that to be quite strict on timing, and I even applied that to Debbie, as you saw. So you'll get a 2-minute warning on this 10-minute presentation. So off you go then, Elizabeth and Nina, sorry.
Hi there, so my name's Liz. I'm from the University of Sheffield and I represent BASNET through the research angle. So I'm the research advisor for BASNET and was really delighted to be in touch with Debbie from the beginnings of BASNET and was really privileged to accept the position of research advisor. I've worked in a whole different area, streams of the research environment since starting a career since 2002, and worked in broad fields across government and across the academic sector. And I have to say that across those experiences, I've been working across and within very white spaces. And so the part of the action plan that I felt I most contributed to was the area of research in particular, where there's a huge issue across the sector, across higher education, that still doesn't properly acknowledge, accept and deliver on greater racial and ethnic diversity. So we must focus on race and ethnicity. And since entering the field of public health and researching the field of modern slavery, I've experienced the same as I'd had everywhere else. So working within white spaces, working with questions that are delivered from a base of knowledge which has not been influenced by affected communities and has not taken seriously the influence of race and ethnicity on how those questions are formed and then researched. So we're working obviously within a wider social problem of racism and unequal representation. And just to reiterate what Debbie said, racial inequalities are not just a problem across our sector, but really fuel experiences of modern slavery and human trafficking in the UK. Reflecting on the process of being within the working group, I just wanted to say there that there really is something in there for everyone. So for us all to become deliberate activists, we can choose our field. There's policy, data, research, law enforcement, service delivery, access to care. There's a lot of work to do with local authorities, immigration and legal provisions, health, engaging with communities and across the charity sector. And regardless of the breadth and the extent of this really excellent action plan, which is really so comprehensive, I think we can all choose a part within there where we can be those deliberate activists that Debbie just pointed to. Finally, I'd just like to say the research panel that we've created in BASNET is at a very early stage, and its ambitions are to ensure that affected communities' voices are evident in the design and the delivery of research. And I'd really like to appeal to you to get in touch with us as researchers so we can ask the right sorts of questions that take account of race and ethnicity in the modern slavery and human trafficking sector. And if you look at the new wonderful BASNET page, there's a link there to the research panel. So thanks for allowing me to be part of this, and I'm really happy to see the action plan published. It's been a lot of work.
Thank you very much indeed, Elizabeth. Nina, are you going to go straight in now?
May I? Yes.
Yeah,
I
please
can
do.
From
Good to see you.
and you likewise. Thank you, Lola. And good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Nina Samota, and I'm really pleased, like Liz, I'm advising BASNET and Debbie on how do we engage with the different points of data collection. Like the Commissioner said earlier, the evidence and data is one of the key themes. And having had discussions with BASNET members more than a year ago now, Debbie, we quickly identified how important our starting point would be in relation to data collection. And so I draw mainly from my experience, as Lola would know, how do we achieve positive outcomes is by actually, firstly, our starting point has to be the data collection, which obviously we are dependent on the Home Office or the single competent authority for providing us with the data. And within that, more nuanced data. But I'd like to sort of cast our minds back to last year when we were, having this discussion in a certain context. And that context is still inspirational. It has driven a lot of work since last year. And it's not simply driven the work here within BASNET and how we as a team have kind of come together to support Debbie and, a small kind of team of people who have really put a lot of information and effort into creating this action plan. So like my colleague Liz, I would invite everybody on this call to actually take a look at this action plan and also play a role in making that a reality. So before, I want to kind of focus on two things, why this is important. And wearing another hat, although I teach at university, I'm also chair for Voice for Change England, which is a Black-led infrastructure organization. And last year, we produced a report called Home Truths. And again, there's much in that report as well that speaks to some of these issues and makes us really think about the inequities in the charitable sector and how, in the different charitable sectors that we work in, whether it be criminal justice or youth services or indeed anti-trafficking, what are some of the issues? And we can't get a hold on how do we solve the problems if we don't have a really access to nuanced data and evidence, because that will then follow on to create the other outcomes that we are all looking to transform and to bring into reality. So how do we make Black Lives Matter in the work that we are doing here? And I think there's some really clear and clear ways in the action plan that is outlined, where we all can play a role, and not just statutory sector, but us as the charitable sector, smaller organizations, and even grassroots organizations. What role do we play in supporting that data collection? Because the obvious interest here is to understand the range and diversity of people that you as the charitable organization would be providing services to, and to achieve those positive outcomes, how what are the things that we have put in place to get better at not just understanding the nuanced data about the people that we deal with on a daily basis, but also in relation to really reflecting a self-reflection on the makeup of the charitable sector. So there's a dual kind of role here within the charitable organizations, one towards a reflection on the self, but also the other towards kind of supporting better mechanisms and sort of tracking and monitoring, which is really quite important. The statutory sector, of course, can help with in a huge way, and at the moment, for example, the national referral mechanism only presents data by nationality. And if we could also have, like we have in the criminal justice system statistics, we also have more nuanced data. It's not perfect, but it actually gives much more nuanced data about the people that at various decision-making points within the system. Of course, I'm conscious of GDPR rules and the data protection issues. But there can be a way, if there's a will, there's a way, because that data is going to help support the charitable sector, the entire anti-trafficking sector, to put better services in place once we know what the problems are. So it really helps us to determine the shape and direction of not simply the services, but also of policy, which is something that I'm interested in. And therefore, it's really useful to have an action plan, which also has been welcomed, at my own university. My colleagues who are part of the Bakita Center, we have a research center for Bakita Center for Research on Slavery, Exploitation and Abuse, and some of my colleagues are very interested in this work as well. So what we are here to do is to actually support BASNET and the anti-trafficking sector in ensuring how do we actually embed good EDI policies, but also do some effective research by embedding and really enhancing equality, diversity, and inclusion in everything that we do. And therefore, it always takes us back to the starting point, which is, where is the data? So if we can actually use that as an instance or a starting point, I would just urge colleagues who are present here to have a real think about how we can work together in partnership, in collaboration with each other, to have some kind of official statistics coming out that the sector can use to enhance better service delivery. And that's really important to BASNET members as well. And in the discussions that we've had, that is kind of the key point that is coming through, because things have slipped through the gaps, and we don't know because we don't actually monitor effectively. The last thing I'd say is that there are some excellent examples of some organizations who are actually collecting and monitoring data, and this kind of idea of self-reflection as to how do we make Black Lives Matter in the work that we are delivering and doing as an organization. Now, that work also needs to be mapped, and I've spoken with Debbie about this, about kind of creating a guide that actually helps, like a repository of information of good practice that all of us can share. And the center at St. Mary's, Bakita Center, we are very happy to collaborate with BASNET and help us to carry this work forward, because ultimately the harsh reality is, and I'll end here, that racial discrimination has unfortunately been an enduring feature of criminal justice, something that Lola knows really well and recognizes, because we've done some work together on that. And also in relation to sort of collaborative work within the sector with organizations, the smaller grassroots organizations, where we can support in how do we collect the data, how we track and monitor the data, and to help establish systems that allow us to, keep a good record of what we do. And I think that is something where we need to build capacity, and we are happy to support organizations in doing that. And Debbie, I'll end there. Thanks, Lola.
Thank you very much indeed, Elizabeth and Nina, for that. You raised some important questions. I've just put in the chat if anybody has any questions that they'd like to address to Debbie or Elizabeth or Nina. I'm not sure if Sarah's still here, but if she is, perhaps somebody could let me know. But yes, if anybody has any questions they would like to ask, I'm going to jump in with a couple now. We've got a few minutes, yeah. So one is around researching in this area, and I guess it's for Elizabeth and or Nina. And I think one of you did mention this issue about universities who are not actually the greatest on diversity and inclusion and equity themselves. And I'm interested in the extent to which researchers' agendas are determined by their own kind, or not determined, but perhaps shaped or informed by their own particular experiences. So the kind of research questions you get, will be very much informed by background and so on and so forth. How do we break that particular cycle? That's one question. And the other question is this issue about statistics, which Nina, you in particular, I think mentioned. And as you said on the Young Review, we encountered this problem again and again. And it feels to me like we're always filling out forms saying what ethnicity we are, but nobody seems to have any data on us. So, and we came across this on the COVID-19 House of Lords Select Committee as well. So what is there that we can do about this push for data? I don't know if any of you would like to ask, and indeed Debbie might have something to say on those as well, although I've got a different question for her.
Shall I go first on the question around higher education institutions not having the best record on ethnic diversity, which is entirely true. And I think I've only just started to see at my own institution some positive moves in race equality action planning across the institution, which is a good sign. It's moving in the right direction. Again, has been stimulated by the Black Lives Matter movement, among other things. So there are positive steps, and I think the research councils are getting better at collecting ethnicity data. So that didn't used to be the case, but has started to be made more routine across the board. But I think there really is required a different way of thinking. And you're quite right to point out that research questions are generated from not just yourselves, but from the people you're surrounded by, and the sorts of research questions then, if you have a very selective base of knowledge, is that it's not really asking the right questions, so you're not going to provide the right answers to what the sector needs. And I think that's really something that we've taken on board this work with BASNET by trying to create this research panel, which is representative of BASNET members, where the community organisations that focus on Black and minority ethnic populations are informing the research agenda, and we're hoping to try and get some funding to support that work more routinely, so people who work in the third sector and represent diverse communities are given the right sorts of reward and compensation for their participation in those things. And we can recruit a more diverse PhD base, have more diverse researcher base that includes community organisations, so improving capacity in those ways.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Nina, did you want to say something on the statistics side, perhaps?
Absolutely, and I think it's no I think it's well known actually within the criminal justice world as well, but also across law enforcement, immigration world as well. we do have data collection. I mean, data is collected all the time. And yes, I mean, if we look at the single competent authority, the Home Office will say, you know, we'll give guidance around how do we use your personal information. And that just goes to suggest that at a certain point when a contact is made or any encounter with an individual for any kind of formal process, that's when the first encounter starts, at which point the state actually starts a form of monitoring on the person. So the data does exist. And I'm just kind of minded that, you know, when it is useful for us, or, you know, then the call for the use of this data has to come from the sector that actually needs, because it needs to deliver proper and appropriate services. And that's why I think what we are doing here, Lola, is trying to build that momentum so that BASNET can formally kind of contribute to the working groups within the Home Office, or where required within the Ministry of Justice, with the CPS, because we need to be at those policy tables where these discussions are being had, like we did with Section 95 that I'd contributed to as well. Because Section 95 under legislation provides the data, and yet again, after years and years of requests made to the Home Office, we've not been able to get the data on, you know, the statistics on race, which comes separately. So these binaries that we are so used to are so embedded that we can't, you know, kind of get the state to deliver data in any other sensible form. And I think we are asking for that. And that's where I think hopefully this conversation will lead to.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry again to cut you off there, but I'm aware. So the next question I've got is for Debbie. And in fact, it was a question that I was going to ask. So Debbie, this is from Patricia Haynes, and she's basically asking, you know, whether or how community-based organizations can have more meaningful relationships with structures like the NRM and other spaces. And it you know, the way I put it was, you know, we tend not to be invited to the table because those groups are seen as less important, less powerful, or whatever. So how can we make that change, Debbie?
There's actually, thank you very much. That's a very important question. There's actually, we raised that issue in the action plan, and we also had a recommendation. That recommendation was simple, is that actually different arms of government, national, regional, local, should, as a matter of routine, engage with different grassroots organizations, but in particular to set up, you know, EDI groups, what we call the EDI groups, i.e. Equality, Diversity and Inclusion working groups. So for example, as part of the modern slavery, the Home Office's modern slavery strategy, there needs to be like an EDI group or a BME group, whatever you want to call it, that can be consulted as a matter of routine. And that's not happening, you know. Most of the time it's Africa or BASNET, the only BME group on the table. That doesn't make any sense in any way or form. So we're saying as a matter of routine, even if you have meetings with the different stakeholders once or twice or 3 times a year, it should happen. They should be consulted, you know, because these are issues happening in their communities. So the idea of them being sidelined or being excluded or marginalized doesn't make any sense. In relation to policy, actually, it doesn't make any sense.
Right, thank you very much, Debbie. And yes, so again, that's, you know, pointing people in the direction of the report, which goes into this issue in some detail. I'm going to take one more question and ask one of the 3 of you to answer quite briefly, at least to start with, and maybe it's something that we'll pick up on later. And this question comes from, let me get the name right, I beg your pardon, sorry. It's the Reverend Jide Macaulay. And the Reverend asks, is there any research evidence around modern slavery? You're shaking your head before you see the question.
No, because I read the question.
Let me just finish. Let me just say, so that everybody, in case people aren't following in the chat, it asks the question whether there's any research evidence that links modern slavery on the grounds of that people are being trafficked through modern slavery on the grounds of sexual orientation or gender. And what about homophobia and transphobia? Do these feature within the sector that we're talking about, or is it just something that we don't know? So I'm going to go to Debbie, and then I'm going to go swiftly to our next panel. So just a very brief answer, please, which I think we already heard.
So yeah, no, sorry, seriously, this is one of the key issues in relation to some of the hidden aspects of human trafficking. Nobody talks about how people in LGBT communities can be very, very vulnerable to being exploited, to being enslaved, to being trafficked, because of the, I guess, maybe the peculiarities of the situation. So definitely there's no data. I haven't seen anybody mention any data in relation to LGBT and modern slavery and human trafficking. And in fact, Jide, we are actually on the basis of this. Jide is one of BASNET's members, by the way. On the basis of this, we are organizing a joint event in September to look at BME LGBTQ and modern slavery in the UK. So it's a known, there's a gap there, yeah, a big gap.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Debbie. And I should have said that Reverend Judy Macaulay will be joining us on a panel later this afternoon as well. So thank you very much for that question. There are other questions in the chat, and I will do my best to get round to them at some point. But right now we do have, I think, most of the members of our next panel ready to enter into the discussion. So this is going to be a relatively short session, but incredibly important because it's with survivors. And quite often people who are categorized as such are left out of discussions and not enabled to contribute. And of course, they're at the heart of what we're all trying to do. If it's not for them, then for who? So I've got a number of questions for them. You'll appreciate that they will not be turning on the video screens. You know, we obviously wish to protect people who are in difficult situations. But I think it's true that the people that we have with us this afternoon have all managed to achieve something quite special in spite of the conditions from which they've had to break out of. So I'd like to welcome them in now if everybody is ready to come in. Naima, is everybody there?
Yeah.
Or here? Okay, yeah. So another, I don't know whether it's this whole Zoom thing, but unusually, I'm not getting that little ring around people's portraits that tells me whether they're speaking or not. So I'm finding it quite hard to see who is speaking and who isn't. But I would invite the panel members who are Ruth, Juliet, Yomi, and Halilat. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So let me see if I can get, yep, okay. Okay, right, so I'm just going to go ahead then and assume that our colleagues are on the call because I can't see them, unfortunately. So the first question I want to throw out to our panel is, what has been your experience with the UK modern slavery sector, particularly in relation to this issue of discrimination or what you've experienced as a racist behaviour? I don't know who would like to jump in first on this particular question, but please just open your microphone and tell us about your experience. Shall I identify somebody? Is Ruth there? Or Juliet?
Hi, it's Juliet.
Oh, hi, Juliet. Hi, thank you. Before you start speaking, Juliet, sorry.
Yeah.
Everybody, can you please mute your microphone?
I'm just gonna.
I'm sorry, there's a lot of background noise, and what I'm trying to do is ask people to shut their microphone down.
I think the background noise is from where I am.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, sorry. I think it might be from my side. Sorry.
No problem. That's fine.
Regarding this question, I won't really have an answer about it. So maybe when another question come up, I can have an answer. So I don't want to talk about something that hasn't really affected me and I've got no clue about. If that's okay.
Then, Juliet. But as you're here, Juliet, perhaps I could ask you another question as I've got you on the line. What do you think we can do better in this sector that we're calling counter trafficking or anti-slavery? What is it that we can do better in relation to identifying survivors and making sure that care provision is humane, compassionate, and equal, and treats everybody with dignity?
Thank you very much for the questions, and I'm just going to answer with the best of my ability.
Of course.
There's a lot of things that can be done differently, especially having all these meetings. First of all, they have to come with a result, because there's no point of doing all these seminars and all these conferences, and at the end of the day, we're still in the same place and there's not coming out of anything. I think that's what we've done in the past. So first of all, I just want to really stress that this can please come with a change. And secondly, I know every organization is trying to do their best, but first of all, things that need to be changed is like kind of like the accommodations for survivors. Accommodation is really, really stressful for some of us, and especially feeling like we are not entitled to it, or like being treated like non-human, and putting us in an accommodation whereby you can't even put an animal. So that needs to be changed. And what was the question again? Sorry, I don't want to go out of point. You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you for telling me. You think I know by now. No, those are all very good points, because one of the questions was going to be, what do you expect to come out of this? And you've started to say, yes, I totally agree with you, no point in just talking. So what kind of changes do you want to see? Are there sort of specific changes that you'd want to see as a result of this initiative?
The changes is just like the work BASNET is doing for it to really have an impact on survivors in a positive way, not the negative one. So like having the changes, like making changes in whatever area that survivors need is being imparted. So our needs, like survivor, we just want to feel like human being, like being know that we're what's the right word to use now? That we're being recognized as human, not just because of what we've gone through. So having a privilege whereby non-survivors have. So I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it absolutely does. And in fact, you can't say it too many times, because this point needs to be driven home to the people who are in a position to make these changes. And that's what we're trying to make sure happens. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to try and speak to somebody else now. Is Halilat there?
Yep, I'm
please.
Here. Hello.
Hi, Halilat. Thank you very much for coming onto the call. I just wondered, have you had any experience that you would identify as discriminating against you, or being like racist behavior at all? Has that been your experience?
For me, I would say that at the time when it happened, I was a child who hardly understood anything. So as I grew older and learned more, I started to understand, the things that really happened. And I would like to say, firstly, that it's important to state the differences between the lack of cultural intelligence and racism, because there's actually a very thin line between them. And I believe that with cultural intelligence comes with pros and cons as well, because sometimes they can work for you or they can work against you. And when I say you, I mean the victim, I mean the child. And also racism also is not always easy to spot. It's not easy to describe or even to prove it in the court of law. So a lot of times it's the little things and it's in the actions and the inactions that this is where we see these things. So what I would like to see change, I would like to see a turnaround in regarding these factors. I'm glad to see that the action plan has something for all the players in the game. It's important to focus on learning and development when it comes to these things as well with the professionals in the game, because a lot of them don't know that they're being racist because they just don't understand, and a lot of them, they do know what is going on and they just think that they know more than the person sitting down talking about the situation, or the person that has been through the situation. We have seen government officials that have written down something different from what a child is saying, because maybe it suits them better, or it's convenient, or the child cannot defend themselves. We have seen cases where police officers have given what they call a professional advice to victims of sexual abuse to discourage them from taking a case forward. So these things, they do happen, and these are the turnarounds that I would like to see. Thank you.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you very much. And I think you make a very interesting point when you say that there's this thin line between a lack of cultural intelligence, which itself has pros and cons, but there's a thin line between that lack of cultural intelligence and racism, and that it's not always that easy to spot. So, and I think that's something that our colleagues in the sector really need to take note of, and also that sense that somehow the professionals, in inverted commas, know more about your situation than you actually do. So that is very useful. Thank you very much indeed for that. So I'm just going to go now. I think, is Juliet there? Or have I done Juliet? Did I do Juliet just now? I've lost track. Did I speak to Juliet before?
Yes, you did.
I did. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry. Ruth, then. Is Ruth there, please? Ruth? Oh, she's not on the call. I've just been informed. So thank you for letting me know. And Yomi, what about, is that Yomi or Yomi? I apologize for any mispronunciation.
No, it's fine. You pronounced it well.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to add on to what Halilat and Juliet said. I think it's very important for the departments that are involved in the service providers and departments that are involved to be quite clear on their policies and implementation and guidance. So when they are gathering their evidence to form those policies, that they use the current situations. So for the Home Office, when it comes to the services that they provide, so I think before, so in my case at the time, before I was housed, because of the legal requirement, I came on the NAS. And so therefore the services, and I think it's called something totally different now. So the services they provide at the time was not fit for purpose. And I think compared to now is even worse. So for example, you get booted out of London, totally out of London, like where you have no connections with anyone. So that for me, if you look at racism and diversity, that there's no consideration of that in that element. So also amount of money, health and well-being that is given is just not fit for purpose, so it's quite important that, departments and service providers do look at their evidence and they do test them and they are realistic about what's going on before implementing those decisions. And also local authorities, when we do get the go ahead from the Home Office, you can have a stay, which is, even that on its own is a challenge. So the court system as well, when you go through the court system is always challenging. Is your story true? All those kind of issues are, you've got someone that has been through a traumatic experience and having to go through that trauma and being challenged just because they want to be clear on what's happened is even more traumatic. So I've seen judges, in my case, didn't believe my story. In this case, the person was even Nigerian, made it worse. Kind of heard that they've seen that kind of scenario before. So that didn't really help as well. Just to ensure that people are trained in their work, and they have this, you know, care mentality, because we're all human beings. And also, I don't know, maybe just to draw the attention more on the racism and it not being so kind of diverse as well. When you get to a point where you're being questioned, say down to the local authorities, and you're with a social worker, sometimes the unconscious bias and the decisions that are made as well comes into place, because not only you sound or speak kind of different, but they just don't have the training in place to understand that this person has gone through this trauma, might sound different. Obviously, someone that hasn't been in school, doesn't have enough level of knowledge, cannot really express themselves the way that you'd like. So those are the kind of training that they need to put in place, and making sure that their staff member are aware, and they are, I don't know what type of great training they've got to do, but those are the things. That was my challenges when I was, you know, going through the process. It was very difficult. And I just wanted to add that in. BASNET, I appreciate what BASNET is doing. They're doing an amazing job. And thank you for pulling this together. Hope we'll see some sort of change. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Yomi. And I think, you know, a number of points you made reinforce what's been said elsewhere, particularly around children and what is expected. But I was also very struck when you talked about what is effectively, you've been traumatized and then you're being re-traumatized under the guise of apparently trying to help you. So I think, you know, again, I would just want to emphasize the point that I think it's really not acceptable not to have the voices of people who've been most affected by these issues, and that without that kind of input into what any of us are trying to do, we're really lacking in an understanding of the reality of this, because you can know about it kind of intellectually, as it were. And I think part of what Yomi is pointing to is, I'm sure all these people have been trained in one way or another, but somehow it just doesn't come through when you're actually dealing with human beings in front of you who've been traumatized in a variety of ways. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists of survivors. I know it's provoked a number of really supportive comments in the chat, and people have noted what you said. So many thanks to Juliet, Halilat and Yomi for attending and giving us such rich information this afternoon. We're now going to have a short break, which I am, I think, going to truncate to 5 minutes, unfortunately. It was me that asked for a break because I think it is quite a long session. However, we hadn't anticipated the delay. So let's, if we can say it's what is it now? It's 14:24 by my clock. If we can reconvene at 14:30, 2:30, and then we'll carry on with the next panel. Let me just double check I've got everything. Yes, so we'll carry on with the next panel at 2:30, starting with Alex from PEC. Thank you very much. Enjoy your 6 minutes, 5 minutes break. Thank you. Well, I hope everybody managed to have a bit of a stretch and a comfort break if necessary, make a cup of tea, whatever, and feeling a bit refreshed for the last portion of this seminar today. So we're now going to have a discussion, or we're going to have a presentation from Alex Balch, who's going to talk to the how we adopt the EDI action plan, actions within the UK modern slavery and human trafficking sector. I just want to say before Alex starts that I've got a couple of questions that have come in via the chat, so I will be holding on to those and opening it up later on during the afternoon. So if you can just hold on to any questions you have, I mean, you can put them in the chat, but just don't forget them. So Alex, hopefully you're there, and over to you.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks very much. And thanks so much to Debbie and the team for all their work and for inviting me to talk today. I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about how the Modern Slavery Policy and Evidence Centre is addressing these issues and how we're working together with BASNET in the research space. And, you know, research is so important here. We've heard lots of really important points and experiences that we need to capture, we need to understand better. It's not just research, it's how research is done, and it's who it's done by. And I think if we can improve the inclusive way that research is both funded and carried out, and the collaborations which underpin that research, then we can really make a contribution. So I'll just spend 1 minute on what is the PEC, because I'm not sure if everyone here would know what the PEC is. We are a group of 6 research institutions, universities, who have got a fund for supporting research into modern slavery. So we're funded through the UKRI, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and we have a budget over the next 4 years to fund research into modern slavery. And you know, we're a sort of network of networks. So we have a great opportunity to sort of address some of the problems, I think, that have been already identified here about knowledge, about inclusivity, about how we go about research onto modern slavery, and how we can do that better in the future. So we're aiming to make a difference both in the way research is done, but also the way hopefully policymakers listen to that evidence and listen to how this issue affects people in order to do better policy making. So just to get into the more concrete details here about what can we do as a research community, what can we as the Modern Slavery Policy and Evidence Centre do to sort of lead in this area and to try and bring forward the sector. We've already spoken with Debbie and her team, and we've got sort of a few points. I'm just going to go through. First of all, data collection. I think we completely agree. We need to get better data on you know, who is involved in research, who is getting the funding, what partnerships exist around funding, and to find this out, we need to do better when it comes to collecting data. So that also helps transparency and trust. So we are going to work with our funder, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which has got its own initiatives in this area, but we feel that we can, working with BASNET, we can do more and we can do things better than they've been done before, and we can get greater understanding of who's involved in research and how funding is dispersed and how research is carried out. The next point is on representation. I think here we can do something very straightforward, and that is to talk about, you know, representation on boards, in structures, on committees, at events. You know, we don't want to have panels where there's no diversity, where there's no diversity of thought, where there's no inclusion. So we can make a commitment about that, and we're going to work together to decide what sort of minimum, you know, requirements we're going to have when it comes to research dissemination events, and what sort of, you know, mix of speakers we see as acceptable or not acceptable. We also want to take this to our advisory board and our advisory group, and make sure we have a much better representativeness in those structures, so that it's not just tokenistic. It's about, you know, the whole structure of how we work and how we're guided. Third point is doing an audit, and this is a suggestion that BASNET came to us with, and we're quite interested in how we can put together a piece of research on the current situation in terms of how modern slavery research has been funded, how that might have affected what sort of methods and what sort of results have been produced, which I think was already mentioned. You know, is the lack of diversity in the research field actually pushing us in a certain direction in terms of what sort of things we do research on? and who is involved and what sort of perspectives are included. And I think that would be a really important piece of work, and it could connect with the collection of data. So it would potentially produce recommendations, guidance for the sector for future funding calls, and potentially, and this is something we've talked about, which is obviously more difficult to make any commitments on, but how we can make funding itself a bit more accessible, and to improve the ways that we make decisions on funding, because I'm certainly aware that however open a call is for funding, there are sort of a multitude of visible and less visible barriers which make it actually quite difficult for a lot of people to apply, and that's not good for the research, because the less diverse the pool of applicants, the less diverse the types of research, and therefore the less deep the understanding of the problem itself. So there's an obvious benefit all round in terms of improving diversity and inclusion. So that's really all I wanted to say, apart from the fact that we're obviously looking forward to working further with Debbie and with BASNET, and putting together more concrete sort of timelines and commitments. But hopefully I've just given you a flavour there of how we're starting to think and how we're starting to do things differently, and how we take this very seriously, and how we want to put that into actions as soon as we can. And we feel that we're in a great place to do that. We've got 3 years of funding left, and we are in a good place to provide some leadership in the sector, and to improve, thereby I think improve the quality of research and of policy making. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Alex, for that digest of what you're doing. And I think we'll all be heartened by that. As one of our previous panelists said, well, she didn't put it in these terms, but the proof of the pudding, and that's what we all want to see, isn't it? So I'm hoping that we'll all be able to make that big push this time around, because a number of us, without wishing to sound cynical at all, and it's not at all directed at you, but we've seen these attempts to do something and to make progress, and somehow they seem to falter. So I'm hoping that this time around we know enough about what's gone before, and we're clear enough about what we want to achieve, that we're able to do so and to fulfill the ambition of the report. That's incumbent on all of us, of course. It's not just about you I'm talking. So there is actually a specific question for you, but I'm going to save that till later. We may or may not have time for very many questions. I'll have to see how we go to the end. Okay, thank you for that then. I'm going to move on now to the theme of research within the BASNET action plan. And I'm going to Robin Brierley from the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network. So over to you now, Robin. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Can I just check that you can hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you okay. Thank you. And I can see your slides as well. And,
okay,
and
great.
I'll give you a 2-minute warning when you're approaching that.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm super conscious that we have 10 minutes to speak about something so complex, but I am just literally going to speak for 1 minute, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, Davina and Jasmine. But basically, I'm Robin Brierley, Exec Director of the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Partnership. It's just one of many partnerships across the UK, and I'm conscious that the partnerships and networks are very much part of the BASNET action plan. So firstly, thank you very much for inviting us today. Last year, as an organisation, we started a conversation, as did many organisations, on whether we should produce an anti-racism statement and what that should look like. We did some research and we looked at others out there, including ones from universities. And after a number of discussions internally, we thought we wanted to do more than just publish a statement, for then it potentially just to sit on file, never to be viewed ever again. And we wanted to do something far more in depth that went into the kind of DNA of our organisation and had sustainability and longevity. So we set up a small and amazing team, including Davina and Jasmine, who are going to speak about the work in a moment, We held a number of workshops and discussions, and the fact it's taken a year, working together with somebody I have to say an enormous thanks to, and that's Carmen Clark, who has really kind of been the driver for much of our work and has been so informative. But what we decided in the end was that we weren't going to just publish a statement. We published a declaration, which is a holding statement, and then the plan was to publish a survey. The survey's gone out, there's 1 week left. It went to 250 people in the network, and we've had around 60 responses. And the responses are from mainly statutory sector and third sector. Not sure how many from industry, I've not reviewed it in detail yet, but some of the responses are hugely interesting. And it's that survey and the results from that survey that are going to inform an action plan. And so the findings from the survey will be published, but I don't want to take any thunder away or any time away from two people who've kind of led on this and played an integral part. So I'm going to hand over to Davina and Jasmine. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you for touching up on some of the things that we were going to talk about already. So, like many organisations, in June 2020, we organised an anti-racism working group. So this is collaborative across many networks to develop an anti-racist action plan. This includes volunteers, managers, staff, partner organisations and board members. It's taken us until this year, which was June 2021, to be able to put out our declaration of intent regarding our anti-racism action plan. We've sent this out to all of our network members. The declaration demonstrates that the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network's commitment to move away from the tokenistic and generic anti-racism statements. And as Robin has said, we did with the anti-racism action plan. This is to be informed by a survey which we've recently sent out. The action plan aims to address any racial discrimination and promote racial justice throughout the network. Alongside this, we also have a language and media group that addresses appropriate images and language like the effects of the hot word BAME and not that had on those that had actually been clumped together within this word. When we're at the, we are in the process of hosting our first tea break session to allow conversations around race in an anonymous, safe setting to draw attention to issues faced and highlight them.
Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine and I am a volunteer for the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the challenges that the network faces concerning the implementation of an anti-racism strategy and action plan. I will then move on to discuss some recommendations for other organisations. So the overarching challenge. Because the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network, as the name suggests, is a network, the organisation is limited in the extent to which it can influence the implementation of change within its membership and partnership organisations. Our membership ranges from the West Midlands Police to the Department for Work and Pensions to an array of non-governmental organisations. We also face logistical challenges ensuring that our anti-racism strategy and action plan are both resourced appropriately. This includes accounting for time, expertise and budget. So how can these be addressed? By creating a tailored and realistic action plan that accounts for the particular characteristics of our network, any logistical challenges and all perceived obstacles. Each organisation is different and a one-size-fits-all approach will not work. Whilst there are undoubtedly entrenched structural inequalities that exist within the vast majority of organisations nonetheless vary in terms of size, the capacity to influence and implement change, the time, expertise and budget available to develop an anti-racism strategy, the ethnic diversity of the team, membership and service users, and the capacity and ability to consult expert organisations. Looking at the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network in particular, due to the nature of the organisation, we cannot support partnership organisations in implementing changes. However, what we can do is establish an equitable recruitment and people support programme, be a beacon for racial justice in the anti-slavery sector, be a clear voice for racial equity, make a bold stance for racial justice in the way that we conduct our finances. In sum, to overcome any challenges regarding implementation, our anti-racism action plan will be tailored, realistic and specific. Now moving on to some recommendations for other organisations. First and foremost, the senior leadership of an organisation should clarify their stance and clearly commit to moving away from tokenistic statements of intent. Leaders play an immense role in fostering or even damaging anti-racism efforts by virtue of their positional power and influence on an organisation's culture, value and ethics. Board members, governing bodies, senior leaders should express a genuine appetite for change by visibly role modelling behaviours and attitudes on a day-to-day basis. Senior leaders should take time to educate themselves about race, to talk openly about race, and encourage discussions both internally and externally to support change. Senior leaders should also be visible at diversity and inclusion events. Secondly, we recommend that all organisations form an anti-racism working group, with the aim being to develop an anti-racism strategy and an action plan. A working group provides a safe space for discussion and provides an opportunity for an organisation to review, reflect and plan. The working group should be accessible to individuals at every level of the organisation, ranging from board members to senior staff to volunteers to service users. Organisations should provide ethnic minority employees, members and service users in particular with a safe channel to express their voice and share their experiences of racism and discrimination. A working group fosters a climate of inclusion within an organisation and also works to bridge the gap between more senior members of staff and less senior members of staff. For ethnic minority employees, members and service users, working groups can provide a sense of belonging and importance and provide an opportunity to talk about their experiences and contribute to organisational change. A working group also creates a safe space for wider community engagement. For the organisation itself, a working group can be a valuable way to engage with and develop a deeper understanding of the team. Organisations should also consider bringing in and consulting expert organisations such as BASNET to help inform the development of an anti-racism strategy. Not only do organisations such as BASNET have a wealth of knowledge, they also often have already established links with diaspora communities, which can prove to be invaluable. Thirdly, we recommend that an internal survey is developed to understand experiences and perceptions of racism within the organisation itself. A few reasons why a survey is useful is that they offer an opportunity for staff members and service users to give feedback, are an effective means of wider communication and engagement across the whole network. They are discreet and they are relatively easy to set up. The results of the survey should be analysed by the working group and embedded into the anti-racism action plan. Notably,
Jasmine, sorry to interrupt you, but just to warn you, you've got 2 minutes left.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Notably, research conducted by the University of Colorado on action planning suggests that employees who witness positive change from survey results are twice as likely to be highly engaged versus those who do not. Using the work and expertise of the working group and the data collected through the survey, it's now the time to develop a realistic, manageable and tailored action plan. Your action plan should be smart and consider desired outcomes and goals, perceived obstacles, resources required, timeline, who is accountable, and indicators of progress and evaluation. Once developed, your action plan should be clearly presented to your team and members, and progress on action should be clearly communicated regularly by the senior leadership. My last recommendation is that it is important to be committed to learning throughout, to understand that it is a process and that it takes time to learn from those around you and from those at every single level of the organisation, and to be open to alternative ways of thinking. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our presentation. If you have any questions or queries, please do not hesitate to contact myself, Davina or Robin. Thank you so much.
And thank the three of you too. Thank you very much, Robin, Davina and Jasmine. That was a very comprehensive report delivered in a very short space of time. So thanks for that. And I think could serve as a useful model for other regions as well. I like the collaborative effort and then the sort of drilling down into this whole issue of racism and social justice and sort of melding them all into one. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on now to ask Phil. And I'm going to ask Phil Brewer, who's the Director of Intelligence at Stop the Traffic, to speak to us. Thank you, Phil. And as with the others, I will warn you when you've got 2 minutes left.
Oh, it makes it sound like you know me so well, though, that I'll probably overrun, but I promise I won't. I promise I won't. First of all, so I just want to give a presentation just around sort of the practical work that we've done at Stop the Traffic in terms of ensuring that we we deal with the element of cultural intelligence, and we've spoken about that a number of times during today. Before I do that, I just want to say thank you to Debbie and to Naima for inviting me to speak today. It means a lot. When I joined this world as the head of the Met's Modern Slavery and Kidnap Unit, Debbie was very kind to me in terms of taking me under her wing, and was one of the organisations that looked after me and sent me on my way in terms of managing policing and a very sensitive issue. So it sort of gives me great delight to be able to hopefully contribute back to the work that BASNET and Africa have put in place. So, as I say, I want to focus just on terms of charities and how we can collaborate together in terms of projects. And the example I'm going to use is one from a campaign that we ran earlier on this year. So it was a piece of research that identified risks faced by Latin American women who had arrived in the UK and found themselves working within the cleaning industry, a bit of work that Flex had done, and along with Laws, the Latin American Women's Rights Service, who had identified an issue where, and within that sort of particularly about women from Latin America, from South America, not understanding rights in terms of what they're entitled to work-wise in a UK perspective, and were finding themselves in exploitative situations. So the campaign objectives, and I'm not going to talk about how successful the campaign was. That's not what this presentation is about. This is about how we come together and we work as sort of different elements of the modern slavery or combating modern slavery sector to make a difference. And so part of this was to provide a resource that would be useful to people that were finding themselves in vulnerable situations, to gather intelligence that told us more about those situations and how and sort of identify the enablers to exploitation, and then looking at how we evaluate how successful that approach had been. And so creating the right content is more than just about ensuring that the right language is used. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, because this is really key. And this is why it is so important to work with organisations that provide sort of face-to-face contact, sort of first-hand support to the people or the communities that we are trying to reach. Stop the Traffic, although certainly my impression of Stop the Traffic before I was employed by them was that they were a large organisation. Actually, they're an organisation currently at 20 people, but they put a lot of effort into the projects, campaigns, using a lot of social media to actually get messaging out there to vulnerable groups, to try and sort of remove some of the vulnerabilities that people face. And because we reach out to so many different diverse communities, in terms of our own cultural intelligence, it can be quite lacking. And therefore, whenever we set up a new project, sort of looking at specific groups, communities, countries, it's important that we engage with other NGOs, other organisations that understand that community, that can advise us and can help us ensure that the material that we put out there will be of use, and actually doesn't just sort of feel hollow to the person that's receiving it. And so part of this project was to just ensure that the groups, that it was twofold really. It was to ensure that the group we were reaching out to understood, as it says on the slide, things such as minimum wage, information, deductions from wages, overtime, all the things that we see where there is potentially an element of exploitation or exploitative practices. Make sure that people recognise and understand what their rights are, and to do that in a way that they can understand. And so, as well as designing this that's went out on Facebook, using the algorithms that Facebook are able to provide us, we can target both geographically and specifically to communities working in certain areas, so we can land our message with the right people, and we make sure it's in the right language. But why do we collaborate? I mean, we can run these projects alone, but they would, as I say, would be pretty much sort of very two-dimensional, and not knowing the culture, not knowing communities, we will miss the opportunity to really engage those individuals. So how language is used is as important as what language is used. And what I mean by that is that certain ways of wording things will appeal to certain groups of audiences, and actually it will demonstrate that, you know, in some ways, even through videos or through landing pages on social media, that someone that is in an exploitative situation can read something or view something and recognize actually it's a situation similar to that they're seeing themselves in. So there's the hook that means that they go more sort of the next step further than just looking at it. And we can't do that unless you understand your target audience. It's about sharing skills and resources and sort of helping smaller NGOs who may lack capacity and capability to deliver these type of projects to become part of our team, work alongside us, or even lead on things so we can support them. And actually that really improves the project outcomes. And just finally, I'll leave you with the sort of the four main parts for me. And that is in terms of that collaboration. And I've heard it said before, I've said it myself, sometimes for a sector that is all about caring, we can be quite uncaring of other people within the same sphere. And I appreciate it can be a cutthroat industry, particularly where funding comes to the fore so very often. But it is absolutely important that, you know, in collaboration, particularly with smaller, diverse groups that work with some real hard to reach communities, that we engage and support and work alongside those groups to ensure that people who are vulnerable don't find themselves exploited. Or at least if they find themselves in the exploitative situation, it's clear on where they can go to help with a group or an organisation that they will feel comfortable in dealing with and can relate to the problems that they face. So we feel that actually by ensuring that we have this collaborative approach, that we get that greater sector inclusion and collaboration. So we're all working together in this. It helps us, absolutely helps us understand the issues that are impacting on diverse communities. It increases awareness and helps sort of put to the fore less recognised typologies within the sector. And most importantly, you know, it creates those opportunities for joint or independent funding, particularly for smaller NGOs that struggle to get that funding by using the evidence from those joint projects. And I'll leave it there, Lola.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. That I was just about to say you've got 2 minutes left, so well done. But seriously, again, another useful contribution, particularly with that practical example. And I guess that whole theme of collaboration is something that runs through the whole afternoon and indeed the whole project, because without it, we just cannot go on. And that necessity of engaging with other NGOs who do have the cultural intelligence, again, relates back to some questions that were being asked earlier. It's really interesting because it's not straightforward, as we all know, but unless we've got some fundamental principles laid down, we can't even begin to move forward. So many thanks again for that. Now I'm going to move on to Matthew, and sorry if I'm about to mangle your last name, Soamimo?
That's close.
Close, but no cigar.
I see Deb.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matthew. That was really helpful. And I think, you know, again, sort of looking both within the organisation itself of the Salvation Army and its own practices, as well as looking at how you deal with the various constituencies with which you're engaged. I think that the issue of translation and interpretation, I wasn't here at the early part of the meeting, but I think that's possibly the first time that that's come up. And if it's not the first time, my apologies, but I do think it's an important area that sometimes gets overlooked. So many thanks for that and for raising that as an issue. I'm now going to move on to Magdalene, and again, apologies in advance, Adenaiki, who is the CEO for Music Relief Foundation, who will be followed by the Reverend Jide Macaulay, who's the CEO of the House of Rainbow. And they're going to be addressing the part of the action plan that deals with service provisions for survivors. So over to Magdalene and Reverend Jide Macaulay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, I'll be giving you, just to warn you in advance, you know the drill now. I will be giving you a 2-minute warning. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for that. I'm quickly going to share screen so that I can just talk through. Just 1 second, I need to get it back up. I was all prepped and then it's gone again. Okay. Right, let me share my screen. Okay, right. So I'm just going to quickly share screen. So Magdalene Adenike. I am the founder and chief executive of Music Relief Foundation. Just going to do a quick impact report. We've been in existence for just over 10 years. So it's 10 years, 7 months, actually found out yesterday. And in that time frame, we've been able to work with just over 5,000 young people and counting, and broken down to the 60% classed as vulnerable and at risk of exploitation, 20% involved in criminal activities, 15% engaged due to interest in the activities that we were actually offering, and 5% one-off attendees. Quickly, because of time, I will quickly go on to a testimonial from a parent. And this was from a mother who was referred to us in 2019, but this was an issue of domestic abuse. Mom and 3 children, and dad was the abuser. So they literally had to leave the house at the early hours of the morning. And where this resulted now was that mom was placed in somewhere outside of the borough. So we're based in Croydon. They were placed outside of the borough, but the issue she had was that with 3 children, they all had schools in Croydon, and the eldest at that time was due to sit his GCSEs. So that was a difficult issue for them. Long story short, they were placed in one room. So you've got mom, one of the children is a girl who was a teenage girl, a boy who was also a teenager, and a little boy. So obviously you can just imagine the kind of things that will be going on with the monthly issues for mom and the girl and the boys and all the other things. Immediately as they were referred over to us, being a grassroots organization, one of the key things I keep saying to people is the strength that we rely on. When people talk about grassroots and they talk about the fact that in regards to capacity wise, we may not have the large amount of people, but the strength that we do have is the fact that we have the trust from the community. And so immediately as she was referred, it was from a friend, and long story short, she was referred, immediately made contact with the local MP for that area, which was Sarah Jones, called our chief inspector of Croydon and said, listen, there are issues here. There's issues with the police, there's issues with housing, there are issues with the safety of the children, because we're looking at issues where they were placed. There were known gangs there actively involved in county lines activities. And the eldest boy was already being approached. And by that time, he'd already gotten into several fights. And so mom was very, very, very concerned. Had to go with her to go to a hearing to safeguard the children, again, away from that. So you can imagine that you're not talking about abuse alone, you're talking about the perpetrator being someone that's supposed to protect them. The point of this particular testimonial is the fact that we're talking about human trafficking, but we're talking about survivors. And we're talking, in this case, mom is a survivor. 2 years down the line, mom is very active in the world of sports because that's her field. But you can see the massive difference. Now, mom and children are now accurately and well placed in an accommodation, and they're happy, they're thriving, and things are going on well for them, which I'm very, very grateful for. But at that point, mom had gone through years of abuse and the children witnessing it. Imagine 2 boys and a girl seeing that tormenting mom. And I use the word tormenting because that's what is happening, both verbally and physically, non-stop. Now the son has had serious anger issues, but it's now a work in progress. And now he's been obviously now approached by gang members to sell drugs, but send them on county lines activities. One of the key things that I'm emphasizing is the correlation between county lines and human trafficking, because that's for us, there's a very clear, I don't think there is a thin line. It's 2 things that people might tend to find as 2 separate things, but actually we need to be looking at how we can look at them as one main thing, which is human trafficking, because these are children who are being sent on the guise of saying that you're going to be able to have money to help because you're the man of the house and you're going to be able to help mom paying the gas bill and electric bill and all the likes. I quickly, while I was putting this PowerPoint together, I quickly just went onto Uncle Google, like I like to call it, and say, okay, let's look at grassroots organizations. And I was able to draw this up from Google. It talks, and it says, grassroots movement using self-organizations encourage community members to contribute by taking responsibility and action for their community. I live and work in Croydon, so it's definitely about the community. Grassroots movements utilize a variety of strategies, from fundraising to registering votes to simply encouraging political conversation, whatever it may be. We find ourselves, I started the organization because of teenage pregnancy. All these years later, 22 years later, we're not talking of teenage pregnancy. We're here talking about human trafficking. Again, when I look at the journey, I find where there's so many synergies and how things are going, kind of meshing in together in one way or the other. And then I looked at, when I was pulling this together, I was looking at the SWOT analysis. I said, okay, yes, there's weaknesses, there's threats. Actually, if I was to focus on that, it would mean that we're not looking at the strengths of the grassroots communities, because the weaknesses and the threats can also be supported by having capacity building, by funding and strategic partnerships. So I wanted to focus on the strengths and the opportunities. The strengths of grassroots organizations, we are community focused. First-hand knowledge and interactions with the community and trusts. So I'm not going to talk about something that's happened somewhere. I'm going to talk about what's happening in Croydon. Croydon being classed as one of the, Croydon can be classed as a town of its own, a city of its own, because it's that big. We have the largest population of young people, I think, coming next to Tower Hamlets. I think Tower Hamlets first or Barnet, one of the two, but Croydon is definitely there. So we have a lot of young people. We have a lot of issues with the young people. In the office now, the phone has not stopped ringing because obviously summer activities is here. We've had social workers, all manner of people that we're dealing with the team now in regards to getting children something actively to do over the holidays. Trust is key. For people to be able to engage with you and leave their children with you or come to you and tell you their issues, they must gain trust. But for us to be able to have referrals from other organizations and saying you need to go to them using these words, they are one of the good ones. It's something that you can't buy. You cannot buy a good name, neither can you buy trust. Opportunities, we're experts in our fields. I like to say that. And I feel every grassroots organization in this call needs to be raising their hands to say that. We have the ability to bridge the gap, an ability to be more flexible and adaptable. And also survivors have the abilities to come to us and be able to have some form of impact, either coming to us for work experience, coming to us to be able to give back with whatever knowledge that they have, because our doors are open. And as you can imagine, as a small organization, we're always going to be requiring people. If your hand is up because it's my time to finish, I am literally done. So that's just my contact details.
Thank you very much.
Sharing. Where do I forward?
Thank you very much for that, Madeline. I do want to make sure that we Reverend Jide Macaulay has time and we have another speaker. So I'll do a little bit of summing up later. So I'll call on you now, Reverend Jide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jide Macaulay. I'm the founder of House of Rainbow, an organization that started 14 years ago. And the primary reason for House of Rainbow is to support Black, African, and Caribbean LGBT people, namely lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people, to reconcile faith and sexuality. But having said that, you know, our communities were also faced with many other matters as well, and it's highlighted in today's program. So first of all, I want to say that I recommend BASNET's Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Action Plan for the sector. Completely recommend this. But I think, you know, the first question that hit me most is service provision for survivors. For the LGBT community, there's actually none, especially when we look at the issues around sexual orientation and gender identity. But I think that I'll focus a little bit more on what I believe that we can do, what I believe that this action plan is setting in place as well. The first thing for me is about listening to people that are fleeing their own country of origin and why, particularly those that are sexual minorities on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. In order to support these communities, we need to look at the appropriate therapy and counseling. And I think that, you know, I was hoping that Matthew Chowemimo was going to say something around that, but he did touch about the appropriate traditional, cultural, appropriate programs that are taking place in their own sector. But I would like to see something more that really speaks into the matters that's affecting sexual minorities. Now, we've talked a lot or mentioned in this program about Black Lives Matter, and indeed the program last year that impacted or continued to impact the work of BASNET. But ironically, the Black LGBT people are still not finding safe spaces within the Black community that is absolutely filled with homophobia and transphobia. So there's this huge conflict between heterosexual survivors and LGBT survivors. But of course, there's still a lack of specialist support. Where are the therapies? Where are the psychologists? Where are the counselors? Where are the religious ministers that can speak boldly, on matters of sexual minority? So, I mean, in addition to the action plan, I also want to maybe offer a few things. It might sound absolutely impractical, but we need to move towards decolonizing religion. And of course, look at countries that are still criminalizing homosexuality, because unless we decolonize religion, it's going to be difficult to decriminalize homosexuality, which is also fueling the modern day slavery and human trafficking. Every single day, my organization receives requests from people that want to flee their nations. And ironically, these are people that are likely to fall into the hands of human trafficking, because believe it or not, homosexuality is still considered a taboo in many countries, especially Black African nations. And many religious communities still call it an abomination. And I personally think that both are wrong. There is a need for people to flee persecution. And when they arrive in this country, I mean, I was listening to, earlier testimonies from Yomi Juliet, and I think I recognized the patterns of abuse within the asylum system. Now, imagine if you're fleeing persecution on the grounds of your sexual orientation, it is more likely that you will fall victim of human trafficking as well. And finally, I think it's important that we begin to look at the psychological wellness and the community connections in urban areas. And one of the other respondents, talked about the fact that people are placed outside of London or outside of the urban area, so they do not have connection with their own communities. In the last 1.5 years, House of Rainbow has focused a lot more on therapy for the LGBT community. We focus a lot on reducing food poverty and all forms of deprivation within the LGBT community. We also look at the issues around health. Mental health and sexual health is very important. And these are still communities that are most at risk. So my friends, I truly and honestly want to recommend the BASNET action plan today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Jide. Or may I call you Jide? Is that all right? It's a bit of a mouthful. Come on.
No, Jide is fine.
But seriously, thank you very much for raising this issue, because I know it can be controversial, and I know it can be difficult for people who want to raise it within some communities, although I don't think it's easy in any communities. But you're absolutely right. And I'm very interested in what you were saying about decolonizing religion, because that really situates where that homophobia, transphobia has its roots, of its origins. So thank you very much for doing that job. And earlier, of course, it was you that raised, and Debbie was able to answer this issue about there not being sufficient data, not being sufficient research into this area. And to me, it feels like, and I might be, speaking completely out of turn here, but to me, it feels like you need both qualitative and quantitative data. You need to understand what these issues are that are preventing people from accepting LGBT people who are in these very vulnerable states. And so on. So thank you very much for raising that. And I'm pleased to see that there's...
If you don't mind, I'll just quick few seconds. House of Rainbow is part of a community group that is actually responding to the UK government around banning conversion therapy. I didn't bring it up because I wanted to focus on human trafficking, but because conversion therapy of LGBT people has also impacted on the fear of the taboo and the abomination that we see. Because I mean, when religious communities are telling you you're an abomination, and your state-sponsored homophobia in your country of origin is saying you're a taboo, and then you fall into this whole situation in the UK, and then subjected to conversion therapy of some sort, it all fills into that element of not getting the right support. And we know that there are so many people that are also in the closet, hiding their sexuality and not be able to get the right support. So I strongly recommend this action plan by BASNET.
Which makes it all the more important that meeting in September, is able to take some positive action there. So thank you again very much indeed. And we're now going on to our final speaker for today. That's Pam Bowen, who's the Senior Policy advisor in the Strategy and Policy Directorate of CPS Crown Prosecution Service, and she'll be speaking to engaging affected communities. So thank you very much indeed, and well done to everybody who's continued. I know it's quite difficult to concentrate, but I'm so pleased to see so many people have stuck with this this afternoon's programme, because it is really, really important. So Pam, over to you. I shall be applying my 2-minute rule to you, as indeed I have to everyone else. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lola. And in anticipation, I've got my timer on my iPhone to buzz me when I'm getting close to 9 minutes.
Okay, so we ought to synchronise iPhones then.
So thank you so much for inviting me. It's been so interesting to hear the other speakers, but also very alarming earlier on to hear of the bad experiences of victims here. So a few weeks ago, Debbie contacted me about the BASNET action plan on improving EDI in the human trafficking sector. And the CPS was invited to adopt these recommendations in the best interests of victims and survivors. So we're very, very happy to support this, although we also share responsibility with a number of other criminal justice agencies. So I went through the recommendations to identify what the CPS already does, what we might do better, and what more we need to do with other partners. So of particular relevance to the CPS, and what I'm going to talk about, is theme 6 of the plan, which is ensuring that immigration and legal provisions can serve the best interest of victims of trafficking from ethnic and minority backgrounds. But we also have a strong interest in understanding the role of culture and cultural practices which fuel human trafficking and how they impact on victims, and particularly the psychological effect on them and how it can affect their behaviour. So this is so important to us, sort of particularly in considering support and how we can help them give their best evidence. So what I'm going to cover are the different responsibilities of the CPS from sort of beginning to end, and the underlying principles which run throughout all of our work in ensuring equality and diversity, but also taking into account the race and ethnicity in what we do, and also the decisions that we take. So the first sort of function I'm going to come to, first responsibility, is something that is part of my job, which is developing and publishing our prosecution policies and legal guidance to prosecutors, ensuring that we consult and seek external validation. So recently I've been updating and changing our legal guidance on modern slavery, but also on organised immigration crime, particularly to respond to the numbers of small boats crossing the channel at the moment. And for each policy, I had to complete a 26-page equality and impact assessment, which required us to consider all domestic legislation, international conventions, the Human Rights Act, the Equality Act, as well as the impact and effect on the 8 protected characteristics, to ensure that it related to everybody, and we took into account sort of all of those particular obligations. We have ongoing and evolving training of our staff, including sort of the training in prosecutions on modern slavery, but also ensuring that the external advocates that we instruct at court are appropriately trained and experienced. In modern slavery cases, often police will refer cases to prosecutors for early investigative advice. That's to advise on further lines of inquiry to assist in their investigation, but this will also include prosecution and victim strategies. And here, when considering victim strategies, if we know in advance of sort of the police apprehending defendants or suspects, but also recovering victims, it's important to understand what their needs are going to be, particularly in such things as interpretation, also knowing whether we need people there from immigration to help them you know, sort of in terms of regularizing their status. Then when making the decision to charge and prosecute, we must apply the code for Crown prosecutors at every stage of the review. And the code directs us to take all of our decisions fairly and impartially, and not to let any personal views about ethnic or national origin, gender, disability, age, or religion influence our decisions. And all of our decisions have got to be taken in accordance with the Human Rights Act. And how this is applied in every case is transparent, as prosecutors have got to record their decisions and how they arrived at them. We also have to give consideration at the outset of a case as to when an expert is likely to be of assistance. And often we will engage experts, and maybe cultural experts, to assist a court and jury's understanding, to inform interviews, for example, but also in giving evidence themselves about how sort of cultural conduct or behaviour has manifested itself in the way in which victims have behaved. We'll also instruct psychological experts so that they can provide the court with an impact on the victim, how it's also affected them in how they have behaved. So in considering with police at an early stage, we also have to consider what measures are likely to assist victims in giving their best evidence and what protection can be offered which are tailored to their needs, and be it by applying to the court for all relevant special measures. So by way of example, I was notified this week about the very first case ever of a vulnerable modern slavery victim who provided pre-recorded cross-examination and assisted by an intermediary following a ground rules hearing at court. So this means that the victim doesn't have to attend court. They can give their evidence 8 weeks after the defendant has been charged, and they can give their evidence in chief and their cross-examination using an intermediary to assist the process, without which we know we would not have captured his really good evidence. Throughout criminal proceedings, we've got to ensure proper support, especially at court and at trial, through applying for and using special measures. And although it's a court's function to determine sentence, we are responsible also for reminding the judge of their sentencing powers, including ancillary orders, which may provide ongoing protection. So, for example, trafficking and prevention orders, confiscation of assets to provide compensation awards to victims. We will also obtain, where we can, victim impact statements to be read out to the court to ensure that before sentence, the judge is aware of and can take account of the ongoing impact of a crime on the victim. And where we consider that sentences are to be unduly lenient, we can apply to appeal it, taking account of the harm factors and impact of the case on the victim. And this is something we've done in numerous human trafficking cases, including, I think it was the very first case under the Modern Slavery Act, where a Nigerian defendant trafficked young women into sexual exploitation, taking them through Libya after putting them through juju practices. And as a result of which she was sentenced to 14 years. We appealed it and it was increased to 18 years. But we also have an infrastructure and established process for dealing with complaints of malpractice, racism and discrimination. And this also includes the victim's right to review whether they're not happy with a legal decision taken by the CPS. So in ensuring that everyone in the CPS follows these principles, I referred earlier to training. We also publish guidance to all of our staff, and that's so important, including the fact that modern slavery training now is mandatory. Achieving best evidence in criminal proceedings and guidance on interviewing victims and witnesses, which is also so important. I know sort of earlier, and it was Matthew touched on the challenges with translation. So for us, one of the problems we have is with interpretation. And we had a case convicted last week involving Kurdish and Romanian defendants and victims in car washes. They were interviewed by a Romanian interpreter when they're giving their video and recorded evidence, but the interpreters were later found not to have accurately interpreted. So it's so important that interpreters are properly checked and qualified so that victims' testimony isn't misrepresented. And in this case, it meant that at court, we had to spend many days having to have all the recorded videos reinterpreted. So I'm conscious that we're already sort of very much over the time that we were allotted. So I'm going to cut it short there, and but I can share with you my presentation and links to some of the guidance so that you can understand the sort of things that we've got to take into account as prosecutors. But I know that, you know, although we're doing quite a lot already, there is more that we can do to improve. And we also welcome opportunities with other partners in how we can achieve that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Pam. Thank you for that. And, you know, there's so many pieces to this jigsaw of the, you know, the whole picture with regard to modern slavery and human trafficking. And it's really good to hear from CPS that that you've been working closely with Debbie and BASNET in order to address some of these issues. And again, you know, as I was saying earlier, the proof of the pudding, we will see how all of this pans out. But for sure, we've made, well, not, I can't claim any ownership of it really, but I'm really glad to see that there has been some real progress. And I think the key thing is to be able to for it to be monitored, to see what happens and to regularly follow up. So we've actually overrun, predictably, given the slightly late start that some of us had. And we haven't really got time for questions. What I'm hoping is that BASNET or PEC will be able to look at some of the, will be able to look at what's in the chat and draw out from that any questions and any responses that people can give. So apologies for not being able to do that, but I think it's time we really do have to finish. But what I'll do is just quickly to thank everybody and to apologize for having misread the format for the afternoon, attributing different areas to the wrong people. So apologies for that. But thank you for all our speakers and to Debbie, of course. Thank you very much indeed for what has been a very, I think, productive afternoon in terms of catching up with what's going on and being able to feel reasonably positive about making progress over the months and years to come, providing we're all still absolutely on top of it and engaged with it. So Debbie, I don't know if you want to make any few last remarks just to finish us off. No?
I do. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Just struggling with my keyboard. Well, I just want to say thank you to every single person who was able to be here this afternoon, and to all the colleagues who were able to present. Obviously, a lot of preparation work went into all your presentations. So thank you so much for that. And also that we will try and circulate all the slides, all the presentations to all the participants, so you can actually get a few and for future reference, obviously. And you know, we will keep you up to date on our activities at BASNET. So please, if you haven't done so, try and become a member, either an associate member, which is open to most people, or you know, a full member, which is open to the grassroots organizations present here. So we can keep you on our mailing list and keep you up to date with what we're doing at BASNET. And of course, for every single agency, charity who has made commitments, we will follow up so that we can track progress, and we would make sure that we report on this, as we said, you know, as we go along. And we also hope that by this time next year, we will be having another conference to report on progress. Again, maybe new issues will have come up then, but whatever the case may be, we will be updating you. And also in September, I can't remember the exact date now, we have a joint event with House of Rainbow, Reverend Jide, to look at modern slavery on the 8th of September. Thank you. On the 8th of September with Reverend Jide to look at LGBTQ and modern slavery in the BME community. Thank you very much.